Hey friends, happy Monday. Thanks for being here with us. My name is Michael. I'm one of Central's co-pastors, and I'm here with Julia, our other co-pastor. And yeah, we got a treat tonight. I'm so excited. As we were prepping for tonight, and I realized that y'all hadn't gotten to meet or talk with Carie and Secunda yet. It just got me so excited about getting to be together with them tonight, and y'all get to experience the wonderfulness that is Carie and Secunda. So, y'all, this is Carie and Secunda. Be sure to say hello, leave something in the comments saying hi. Yeah, let's start with that loaded 2020 question. How are you guys?
Wow.
I know, right? We're going to start off strong here, okay? It's probably not a fair question, but.
I am, I'm good. At this point, I think this season of like we're literally in a disaster, right? And I think people don't say it, but we've been living in a disaster, a pandemic for what, like, has it been 9 months almost now?
I think it's like 9 years. Secunda. Yeah, I lost count.
And like I think we go through these cycles, like these cycles of like depression and like creativity and like just all sorts of craziness. Like I've done more self-reflection, self-help. I'm self-help guru now from this. But at this point, today, this week, this season, I am filled with gratitude. And I am good.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all I can say is I'm hanging in. 2020 has been what it's been. 2019 and 2018 with the hurricanes. I'm hanging in here. I haven't given up yet. So I echo what Secunda said, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Well, Carie, Secunda, why don't you guys take just maybe a minute or two and just kind of introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do, where you're from, anything you want to share with our community so they can get to know you a little bit. Carie, why don't you jump first?
Secunda knows I always let her go. I do not like talking. Okay. My name is Carie Cauley, as you know. I grew up in Bryan. I went to school here in Houston College. I've lived here ever since. And I'm just a lowly community organizer here, willing and, doing the best to make sure that we have equity in communities that have been overlooked. Specifically, like my love and my passion is for the Black community, which I represent, who I am. And yeah, that's pretty much, hopefully I got everything, but that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Carie. Yeah. And Carie, I think we've known each other it's been a couple years now. Really the last probably year, 6 months, I think, we've gotten to know each other better, but through Project Curate and through some of the work in Houston, it's just been a gift to get to know you and really inspired by the work that you do. Secunda, you want to jump in and tell us a little bit about you? Oh, we might have lost Secunda. Let's see if she comes back in just a second. So.
Oh, no.
And I did forget to mention BLM, HTX, Imaginor, and then I moved on to Project Curate. Actually, the first part was Truth to Power. Then I moved to BLM, HTX, and Imaginor, and have done work with Project Curate. So, yeah. That's it.
While we're waiting for Secunda to jump back on, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about some of the work that's happened with BLM, HTX, and Imaginoir and those collectives that you're a part
of? Okay, so I would leave most of this to Secunda, but it looks like she popped back in.
She here, yep.
She saved me.
You were doing great.
Yeah, it's so good, Carie. Yeah. Sweet. So, you want me to pop back to Secunda then? Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Perfect. Yeah, we got it. Secunda, you're right on time. That's great. So,
Hey, you know,
Secunda,
Carrie's the introvert. I'm the extrovert.
that's right.
So I'll be like, jump in the shit.
I
You
just
know,
look like, don't ask me.
listen, in the midst of a pandemic, I live alone. So like seeing people, like sometimes I have to pull back a little bit because I'm just like, hey y'all, you know, I'm overly excited. But before Zoom kicked me off, I think you were asking us to say a little bit about ourselves.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Houston. However, I like to say that I'm Houston born, Louisiana raised.
There you go.
I am from a community of people who have like years of roots deep in Louisiana. Folks who didn't even speak English was not their first language, literally. And I grew up in Houston in spaces in churches where the people around me also had the same background. So grew up in church, and there was a lot of social justice work happening at the Catholic churches. That I say churches because it's like groups,
Yeah.
churches or whatever, in Northeast Houston. And there was, particularly at the church that I grew up at, St. Peter Claver Catholic Church on North West Side, there was a lot of social justice work happening, you know, throughout my life. And now, since I've, you know, just had different conversations with my grandmother, I mean, she also was very like active in her younger days. And it was just, it was part of my life. And, you know, things happened, and I found myself transitioning from a person who focused on communications and public relations to like just shifting that work to community organizing work. And here I am. I've been doing that here in Houston full time, basically. Like when I say full time, I don't mean work, I mean life. Since probably 2015. Yeah. So.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, so you hit on a little bit Secunda, but would y'all both talk a little bit more about, yeah, like how faith shaped your community organizing, or how community organizing has shaped your faith? And we can circle back to talk about BLM, HTX and that stuff now too, if y'all want to know. But yeah, just like how faith and community organizing or advocacy intersect for y'all.
You know, I was in doing this, I thought about something that happened to me long time ago, right? Like I mention all the time, my mama brought me to these like protests and, you know, that sort of thing. And even my grandmother, you know, her work in bringing my mother, you know, and even we've been, you know, if something happens, unfortunately, when you're Black, like there's always, before BLM, like, you know, before it's national news, there's always people organizing for liberation for Black people, right? So my family has just been in contact, you know, when they hear something happen, they believe you show up. So, you know, I showed up when I needed to show up, right? But I remember, so I became saved, you know, that word is not used in the Catholic Church, right? No. You make the first communion, you know, you confirmation, be straight. Like, what else is it, you know? But I remember searching for. I just needed to search for God, and I looked everywhere. Like I went to all kinds of churches, other Catholic churches, or I just wanted something that I didn't have, and I found it. You know, and I found it. I was like crazy reading scripture. I was like, you know, I was a super quick Christian, you know, when most people were like just living their best life. Like I was just like super Christian, in love with Jesus. Like I would pull, okay, this is not the story, but like, just know that I was one of those people who would be like, and I didn't care who it was, right? It was like, it could be like homeless people. It could be people like drinking. Would y'all like to pray? Like I was that person, okay? I was that person.
Are you passing out checks? Are you passing out cards and all kinds of stuff?
I didn't have no card. That's the thing. I didn't even have a group. I was the super Christian. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's me, right? So, me and Jesus.
First church in Secunda, right? Yeah, I like that.
But I remember like just being like in love with Jesus, and it seemed like at one point things hit me, right? I looked around looking at my community, and I was, you know, like I would walk sometime, and I remember walking and praying and thinking and just seeing not just my neighbors or the joy or the fun or the people that I loved and care about. I remember seeing the hardships in ways that I had not seen, because this is my home, this is my community. I lived in Fifth Ward. I love Fifth Ward, and I was just, you know, and I remember praying and asking God to, like, you know, help me to, because Jesus is the answer if it's a problem, right? So you think, help me to help them, right? I'm them. Help me to help them, okay? But during that time, I'm gonna try to make it really quick. During that time, I like around the same week, I was watching Channel 8 or something, and some documentary came on about this place called Tulia, Texas. And in Tulia, Texas, back in 1999, it was saying how they had arrested up to 15% of the Black population. Tulia, Texas is a small town, about 2,000 people. They arrested 15% of the Black population, so say they were drug dealers. Now, I'm like, my people from a small town in Breaux Bridge in Louisiana, and I know 15% of no population nowhere is drug. First of all, 15% of 2,000 people in nowhere, nobody, that many people shouldn't be locked up for selling drugs. It was about 46 people that they arrested. Some man that they hired who was a undercover cop, because of course these small towns getting grants to hire these undercover cops. He did his job. He got an award for it. A lot of people early on that they arrested and indicted were given between, they were like, they were saying, hey, we're not guilty of this. And they were given like 20 to like, you know, 100 years. I think one person was 300 or something like that in prison. I'm watching this, and it was, some people were sisters and brothers. They said about 50 kids were like left without their parents. Right? They literally snatched Black people out of their homes and locked them up. And the jury of their peers, you know, convicted them guilty, right? Because of course, most of the jury were white, right? And you have these people in a small town. The town is poor anyway. So the Black people are really poor, right? And I remember watching it, and I was screaming. I was horrified, you know, and I remember praying, and I was saying, God, like, who are you? Like, how can you do this? I'm walking around saying that you have all this power, but how could you let this happen? This is not new. This has been happening. Like, how can you let this happen? I'm really like angry with God, crying out. The show is still on, right? And about a week or two prior, I had went to U of H with one of my cousins, and she was in law school or whatever. And she had to do something for extra credit. So some lawyer was talking. So I went and listened to him. And he was talking, he was fighting for people who had been like given death, Lord, I can't think, the death sentence, right? Given the death penalty. And he was one of those people who really tried to help people who were wrongly convicted and didn't have a fair trial, whatever. And anyway, so in the midst of me watching this show and crying and angry at God, this man just pops up that I just saw. I couldn't forget him because he was a white guy from New York, had a real heavy accent. And then I heard the Spirit say, when people do what they're called to do, like, the world is better. Like, it was just something so simple, but it calmed me, like, for that moment. And I think a lot of times we talk about the events that happen, you know, when you got into doing a thing, right? You know, what moved, but I think for me at that moment, what was planted in me was that this is something that I have to do, and not just me, everybody.
has to do what they're called to do, you know, and when we work, when we use our hands, the world is better. So that is, I think, the seed that planted. It became really important to me to find a church where folks were doing some sort of justice work. I think at the time, just even some sort of charity work that were addressing issues, and I think that's where it started for me.
Yeah, I love that. That sort of like crisis moment that you have of kind of screaming out while you're watching the show, right? That didn't lead to sort of this, I'm going to abandon this and leave it behind, but instead this kind of searching out, this like wonder to find places where folks were getting caught up in that spirit and that call, I think is the word that you use, Secunda, to make the world better, right? By doing your part. You mentioned briefly. Yeah, go ahead.
Nothing happened after that. Like, it was just, you know, I think sometimes we think that, like, you know, there's a moment, you know, but nothing happened, but a foundation was built, you know, in me, I think. And then that was it.
Yeah. Carie, I wonder, how is your story different, similar? Did you grow up in church? Was this kind of activism, organizing a part of that growing up?
So for me, I would say that like it was a part of me growing up, like both the church and activism. My dad and my mother really did a lot in community. And so like my house was the house that you knocked on to get whatever situation resolved and get done. We would find whatever solution. And so like my parents would talk to whoever they needed to talk to, because they were very active in their community. Like they did whatever needed to be done or whatever they felt like they could do. And so I grew up with that, but I also grew up like while I was in my mother's womb, like it was already designated what denomination, what churches I was going to, all of that. Like in the summertime, I would be with my grandmother in Houston. Her husband was a pastor. My uncle was a pastor. So we were at church every day of the week, all day long. Like there was no quitting, and they were Baptists. And my upbringing was Methodist. And I actually like gave my life to Christ, was baptized at 8 years old, and knew then and took it very seriously, my relationship with God. And so like I feel like it's always been a part of growing up, of everything that I do. Similar to Secunda, I was a super Christian. And when I think back, like a lot of my experiences of church in a lot of ways, like as it relates to Methodists, they were Black Methodist churches, but they were United Methodists. They weren't AME. But like a lot of them were still radical in their own way. Like they didn't necessarily do everything, but at the same time, they didn't move in the same way that the United Methodists exactly move, because their congregation in our community called and needed like different things. We weren't stuck in like specific, like there were some things that we did that were traditional, but we weren't so bound to those things that like the spirit couldn't move, or we couldn't move outside of that. And because I grew up in a small community, like we went to like my pastor was guest pastors at other denominations, so we got to look at and experience those churches as well, like Pentecostal, different, all types. It didn't matter. We were all in it together. So that's kind of how, I feel like me is to kind of share that part about as I grew in my relationship with God, like that super Christian, definitely there, definitely for me was problematic. You know, and I think too, just over time, you know, when we talk about, I feel like the church a lot of times deals in absolutes. And those absolutes, they themselves cannot follow or sustain. And so it for me, that was kind of what I wrestled with. We're saying all these things about Jesus. We're saying all this about, you know, how he's an example and how, you know, when things were wrong, you know, he spoke up about them, but things were definitely wrong. Like being that super critic, I was in every ministry, every Secunda can tell you, because we both ended up at St. John's downtown. Every ministry I was in, for the most part, not most ministries, like I went into everything, but I was in most things. And so just, you know, seeing that and seeing and not only that, but even the way like Black churches were treated specifically within the denomination, how they didn't get support, how they didn't get help. And I don't want to go into all of that. I mean, I do kind of, but it's like it's a lot, you know. My dad accepted his calling and had a 4-point charge. I know people probably don't know what that is. That's where he was over 4 churches because all 4 of those churches were not able to financially pay for a pastor to be at their particular church. All Black, all of them had building issues, all of them had where people were leaving and dying off because it was elderly, or the folks that had been there because it was in a very small, like even smaller than my where I grew up. It was very small. It was like nobody, 10 people, 15 people. And just not having the resources. But then when you looked on, and I hate to like go black and white, but when you looked at white churches, like their building was still intact. Anything that they needed, they got the help that they needed. And so like, even in working in that, and I guess for me, I feel like it's important because a lot of times we want to do justice work like outside of the church. But we don't want to address the stuff that's in the church. We don't want to be the truth teller or truth bearer right here in the church of what's going on to our next door neighbors that we end up being in conference with. And how we deliberately are not helping them, how we're deliberately not funding them, how we're deliberately making it hard. Like, even when I think about like women, Black women, and I'm sorry, I'm going here because I am United Methodist. So when we're talking about Black women being ordained as elders in the church, I've had so many Black women that I've talked to that have been discouraged by the process, who have been partnered with folks that didn't know what they were talking about, but somehow miraculously made it. And then it was left up to them to see, oh, the Holy Spirit, maybe your discernment is off. And it wasn't off. They were called. And it has to do with systematic issues within the church. And this is not Central. This is not Michael. Like, this is what I'm saying. So if you got a problem with it, you can try to DM me. My DM don't work. I don't even like Facebook. Or you can reach out to me. That's fine. But I don't want it to be a reflection on y'all. I'm saying this for me because that has been my experience. That is my truth that I have lived, that I have experienced. And so it's just kind of like those. So anyway, but you know, for me, those are the type of inconsistencies that started making me question, similar to Secunda. Well, if we're really going to be talking about Jesus as being just, Jesus as being, you know, to walk discerningly and to do justly, then what are we talking about? And how are we saying that this is God when there's no spirit in? Like, we're contradicting what we're saying. So yeah, All right.
Carie was trying to say she was an introvert earlier, Secunda. Is that what I heard? Man.
She is until.
I know.
I'm an introvert.
She's an introvert. So when she speaks, she has something to say. Yes, Lord.
She's pondered it before she speaks.
Yeah. Carie, I was reading just today actually about, in the UMC specifically, the disparities between pay between male and female preachers. And then when you add racial ethnic demographics, right, that disparity gets even worse. And so there's a post that somebody put on Facebook today that said, and basically called it sinful, right, to be cultivating this call in these young women, specifically young Black women, and have them go through the process and take out the tuition money and go to seminary in your years. And then because of the system that we have, there's no place for you, right? And then our preachers are not inviting you to come preach in their pulpits. And so we got a problem. And I wonder how that affects the church's witness, right? If we can't take care of our own house, right? If we can't sweep up inside, how in the world do we have a message to offer the rest of the world that says this is what the kingdom of God looks like? This is what justice looks like. This is what Jesus was talking about. No wonder people are sort of falling away from this and looking elsewhere for justice work, right? Outside of the church.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, I just, I think that's one of the things that I really had to grieve, as it relates to my faith call, or my faith walk or whatever, and maybe, at the same time, I find it a blessing because I'm not stuck there and I'm not bound to that, right? And I feel like there are very many people that are bound to that. And so the rejection of that from this church that they've poured in their time, that was said that if they did these particular things, then all these things will follow. The rejection of that, like, I know has been very difficult and hard, on folks. But, I go back to, even if you look at the commissioning, like when we go to conference and different things, like, where are the Black women? I see white men, I see white women, I see Black men, very few, but they're there. But I mean, it's like every few years you may see one or two. And so, and at the same time, I see that and I'm sorry, I'm going all the way off topic, kind of, but I'm gonna bring it, but I feel like it relates to justice because a lot of times people do not look for or at where Black women are. And so, in looking at that, so you mean to tell me that no Black women were called?
Yeah.
No Black women, even though they do plenty of work in the church. And it's not just like UMC, it's Baptist. We're getting a little bit better, but it's no way near where we need to be. You mean to tell me nobody? I go to, like, historically, there was a woman by the name of Jarena Lee, who was a part of the AME church. And when we talk about, like, structures and things within the church, like, she knew she was called. The Holy Spirit moved her. She didn't even want to say that she was called because of the way the structure of the church. And when she finally did, they didn't, like, accept her until, like, she was old and like she was at the end of her ministry or after she passed away. The same thing with, like, Harry Hosier, which, we talk about. Now, Harry Hosier was this Black man that during slave times, the United Methodists took to plantations to woo the plantation, the owners. And he was so cold and so bad and so called that he would woo everybody on the plantation. And still no recognition, no accepting of calling, no saying any of that. So when we talk about justice and we talk about, like, the harm that churches do, like, they want to, use, like, to me, it's like using folks, you know, and it doesn't come back right. But anyway, I'm gonna get off of that. Yeah.
Thank you, Carie.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. And yeah, so you have already started down this path. I think you're right on target. So I wonder what other challenges y'all see as the church relates to community organizing. So as y'all do this community organizing work and advocacy work, and you know, some of that historically some of that work has been partnering with churches and things like that. I wonder what challenges come up, what walls does the church put up, what ways does the church, you know, cause more harm than good, all those things. Yeah.
I think the church, you know, I want to start with like the opportunity of the church. It's like the church has space, the church has people, you know, and the church is very beneficial because in justice work, because you can get the word out, right? You can communicate. It's a place where you are introducing ideas, right? You are, you know, getting people. You're basically building empathy, right? Care, love, all these type of things. And I mean, and those things and justice go hand in hand, right? You're teaching, right? How we treat one person or another. So having that sort of space available to justice workers is very beneficial. There's so many ways that I think, you know, because people talk about love, but they don't mention how many times, like, you know, for what's on my mind is just how, like, I remember reading through the Old Testament all the time. And then, but oftentimes, like, the way it was read to me was that, like, people didn't do right, God tore everything up. But people didn't mention oftentimes how they were like, oh yeah, but you're, you know, charging your own people double. You're not treating the poor right. You're not treating the poor right. Oftentimes when God was like, I'm coming back on y'all. I mean, not trying to get all, you know, God is sending hell and brimstone and all that, but that's in the language. So having an opportunity to bring that language out, and having justice workers talk about how that relates to justice is important, because I think the reason why we're in this space is because a long time ago when Christianity was built, they told Christian people that it was okay to treat a certain kind of people this way, right? So I also think that, you know, the church has to do its part in saying this is not okay, and it's more of a cultural thing. Church just has to be honest. So having a space where people can tell the truth and say, hey, this is wrong, this is what we did, this is racist, that's important, right? And then also having a space where justice workers can say, hey, y'all, this is what we need. People are in trouble. People who are interested, are y'all down, right? That's important, that kind of stuff, you know, and churches have provided spaces for us to do that. Churches, you know, having the means to, like, gather food and do all that kind of stuff, like, that's been helpful. I think what's been hard is that the desire for a church is to build the church, right? But the desire for justice people today is to build the people, right? It's the people are the church. The people are in need. So if I have to come to your place to get the food or to get the whatever, and I don't have transportation, then I can't be served, right? So I think we had to, like, it was different ways where we had to find, well, how can we, churches who are open to us being able to connect with them and go to the people, that's been helpful. Churches who want you to bring the people to make them fit in a particular way so that they can get help, that has been a pushback. And that's not something that's, you know, that hasn't happened. Like recently, we did a lot of work during the time of Harvey, right? Houston was devastated. And there were some spaces, and I mean, you know, we're grappling for everything from everywhere. Here we are, we're a grassroots organization. We're in the social services space, right? So we had to create systems and, you know, join with people, all kinds of stuff to get things happen. And we're like, okay, well, telling people, okay, this place is a resource, right? They can help you. We found this great group of people, we thought, right, that was willing to fix, you know, these people homes and all this kind of stuff. But they wanted to like visit the home. The people had to agree to have a particular dinner with them. They even asked for the people to have a drug test. Wow. So of course we couldn't refer, like, you know, so it was like, okay, if you need these people, you know, cause I don't want to I can't make these decisions for you. Like I didn't want to say, well, this is a resource, but we're not going to go with them. That's what I wanted to do. Right. But what I found myself, or what we found ourselves doing, is just being like, well, this is a space, you know, but they want you to do some things that you shouldn't have to do to get this work. But if you need it, you know, that sort of thing. And I think but that's the thing about churches. That place was an extreme example. But I think for many churches, they want credit. They want to build their name, you know, a name for themselves, and justice work is not the type of work that's going to build a name for yourself. It's going to destroy or hurt or give you some trouble with some relationships that you may have with establishment. Churches are very rooted in government, you know, with mayors, with you know, city council members, with people who justice workers are pushing against, so that people can have what they need. But oftentimes, you know, churches are nonprofit organizations, right? Nonprofit organizations, you know, get a lot of support from government. You know, they've always been church and state in a way, right? So if you are, if there's something that I need, right? I'm speaking out against some person who, you know, you might be looking to, I don't know, you know, create some space or get a contract or whatever those things are with the church, then there may be some friction, right? You know, justice workers and doing justice work is a threat to being more established and being rooted. So I think those are the spaces for me that I have had. That's just, and I mean, and it's funny because that's not even the personal things, right? That's politics, right? That's politics, but it's real, you know, and it threatens, it threatens the relationships between churches and people who they say that they love. So, yeah.
So helpful to think through, Secunda. Yeah. And I think especially, as the church kind of gets married to organizations of power, right? That's when things kind of get all topsy-turvy. And when it becomes more about empire building, when we think about, you know, the prophets in the Old Testament or Jesus, right? Where does this thing lead, right? Not to more wealth, more prosperity necessarily, but Jesus ends up on a cross, right? And I think churches have kind of forget that the justice work, if you're in this for the glam, the Instagram photos, the opportunities to grow your name or your brand, it becomes very threatening in that way too.
Yeah, and it's funny because we do live in a world, I mean, even with nonprofits, like that's something that we push back on, where people want to see, you know, your brand is based on show me some pictures, right? Basically, right? But those things, you know, threaten the dignity of the people sometimes that you're serving. And we've been we've had to work. One of the ways that we found that was easy to work around some of those things is by creating language, right? Before we get into coalition with people and letting them know, hey, this is the work that we're doing, but this is how we walk into this space. This is how we posture. And this is how we can get into relationship, because I mean, I'm not judging the church for folks moving in a sense that they have to, you know, to survive, right? Like I can't, all those things are real. My questions are, given where we are, what can each of us do so that you can do your lane, right? But at the same time, you can help me, right? In ways, and help the people so that we don't threaten and everything. We're not going to be able to do the same things, right? I respect that. But don't fight against us, right? And sometimes, you know, we've been lucky, you know, in a sense where we found some spaces where folks have been willing to allow us to do us. And then we found some spaces that wouldn't. So
That's great. Carie, is there anything you want to tag onto that? If you're good, I don't want to call you out if you're all good.
She did all of it. So kind of got it all. I mean, the only thing that I would like really emphasize is the part about truth telling and the ways in which for me, the church has not made room for justice work because they have refused to do the truth telling. Like what people are taught in seminary and what people are taught other places is to accommodate the, your congregation, and don't say something out of term, even though truth may have been shined on that particular practice or way of doing things. Like, just, we're not going to do that, because to do that would change this absolute that we have been teaching for however many centuries, or, you know. So for me, it's kind of like, I agree with everything that Secunda said. To me, Secunda hit everything. But for me, it's also like the church has not, one of the struggles that I feel like they have come to now is because they have not laid that groundwork there. It's like folks don't know what to do because they're still trying to save something that may not need to be saved. Like, it may need to just go ahead and, I mean, I'm not talking about, Lord, I don't want to get into all that, but yeah, I'm gonna be quiet.
Oh, Carie, I'm here for it. So this is great. This is great. Julia, I wonder, so hearing this and thinking about kind of your role as pastor, right? And pastor of a community like Central, I wonder just kind of what's bubbling up for you, what responses, like thinking of the pastors that may be watching this right now, like sort of our responsibility of making space of some of that translation work and theological grounding. Kind of what's surfacing for you with that?
Yeah, I think it's what it's sounding like, and y'all feel free to correct me, but kind of finding a balance of like moving in these like spaces of power that can like open doors and things like that, as like something, I'm thinking specifically in Galveston, but like something like doors open for you if you're a pastor on the island, especially a white pastor of a mostly white congregation, right? And so some balance between like doing the work in those like spaces of power to then open doors for justice workers, or for like you guys, Carie and Secunda, for y'all, trying to stop saying you guys, for y'all. And then also there's like the other side of like then just like getting out of the way. And like I heard you say, Secunda, like you've been in some spaces where people have just like let y'all be y'all, And I think that's, yeah, like, yeah, finding that balance is what I'm hearing, like using my privilege and power as a white middle-class pastor of a mostly white, or like at least majority white middle-class congregation, in ways that like lets y'all then go be y'all. I don't know. Mostly I heard get out of the way. So, in the best way. That sounds like no. Anyway, I heard like let justice workers like come in, like let the people come in and like listen, and like they know what they need and they know what's like best for them.
Yeah.
Just do. It's like trusting people's experiences and all that stuff is what I'm hearing.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think, you know, when we're in a space and people are, I think the most successful, it is when people have people around them who are willing to, one, who trust them, right? And then two, who are willing to provide whatever resources they need, you know, that's available so that those folks can be successful. And you know, there's an emergent strategy. Adrienne Marie Brown says, you know, if you trust the people become trustworthy, right? And oftentimes when systems fail is because there is, in some of those places, there is not trust, right? And in other places, the people who are supposed to be supporting are not supporting. For example, Carie mentioned earlier about how, you know, there's a systemic issue within the church, how like Black churches, and, you know, I did a lot of working with Black churches, Black Methodist churches as well. And what I saw in the Black Methodist churches that I worked with, one was a big church, one was a small church. But what was similar with those churches is that the people were working day in and day out. There were so many ministries. There are so many, and I mean like ministries because of like need, right? Even churches that didn't look like that they had a lot of services happening because the need is so great, you know, in these communities, like they're tired. The pastors are tired. The workers who are getting paid are tired. And then the volunteers are tired. Everybody is working. And most times these people are not middle-class people. They don't have luxury in their life, right? And what I mean by that, I don't mean luxury, I mean time. I mean being able to go home and rest. I mean, like, you know, there's a lot of people that need to be cared for. So there's just a lot of work. And that's what I see, you know, happens in those spaces. But when you walk into a space and those people are giving the help that they need, right? If the people who are volunteers who are face-to-face giving people what they need to, for example, for food, or, you know, they showing up at jailhouses or whatever. If the church is just doing things that they need to do, if the church needs to, hey, let's just make sure we keep this email running, right? Hey, let's just make sure we fund this amount or do, you know, whatever fundraising we can for this particular time, right? Whatever that thing is, let's do the administrative work, right, for this particular group or people so that they can be effective. Churches who have done that have been a huge help, right? But you can't do that without trust. You can't do that without trust. And yeah.
Yeah, trust is so, yeah, it's vital for this stuff. And yeah, I think without that foundation, and especially like the things you guys have lifted up with the history of the church and the tendency towards agendas or using people for particular means outside of justice work, right? It's got to be hard as activists and organizers to step into that space and to say, okay, I'm bringing my people with me, right? It's people that may be vulnerable as well too, and saying, let's see what happens. So,
and sometimes the best way is I'm not going to bring all my people with me, because there is no way you can make this a safe space for my people. But what you can do is you can use your resources, or you can, you know, help in some other ways so that I can still assist sometimes my people not going to come. It's too far. It's not on the right side of town. You know, the police gonna pull them over when they pull, whatever those reasons are. Some are within the church and some without. It may not be the best place for all of my people, but some of my people, right? We gonna need you to tell y'all people, your security guards out here, stop asking me for my ID every time I pull up. Like, those are the sort of things. So, you know, your security guards get used to our group. Like, we, you know, we've been through. Like,
Preach.
okay. I'm not
security
showing
guard.
you my ID again. Like, you know, just small things like that. So if me being, you know, my small crew is showing up in your space, right? And I'm getting, you know, questioned, and people are uncomfortable and scared, and they're doing my grandmother used to call them top flight security of the world. That's a joke. It's from it's from Friday. Y'all may not. Yeah. That's a reference from Friday, but top flight security. If top flight is checking me 10 times, you know, every time I come up and I'm uncomfortable, there is no way I can trust, because then that'll ruin your reputation as well. But if you let me just go back, you know, and say, hey, you know, we're in partnership with these people, right? And then those people can be, oh, those people over there, they good. That don't mean I'm coming. But, you know, but I know that you are serving the community in a way that you can serve.
Yeah, that's so helpful.
Do you think the church, but that's my question. Do you think that where the church is now, like, is that like a comfortable space? Like, because I can tell you that, right? I can say, oh, Michael, Galveston Church, y'all don't worry about it. Like, you know, we're gonna do good in Galveston, and, you know, and we're gonna all work together and do this great justice work. But you may not be able to show proof, right? Like, so, which means that there's some support that you may need to make sure, and what I mean by showing proof, I mean showing proof by the things that the systems say is acceptable. At one time is what butts and seats. I hear y'all Methodist people say that all the time. You know, like butts and seats, or, you know, those things that are success, like considered successful within the church. Like, you might be ready, Michael, you know.
No, I think it's Secunda, because like, the reality is that, like, this work at a place like Central, so we've got those typical metrics, right, that I'm graded on, whether I'm a successful pastor or not. But what happens when the justice work that we need to do means that things at Central need to get rearranged, which means that all of a sudden I got less butts and seats than I did beforehand, which means that my offering plate is looking a little bit skimpier than it was the week before. You know what I mean? So I think those are terrible metrics to have. And so this is a larger issue. Carie and I are going to restart the whole church, because we got it today. But, like, you know, if these are our metrics, what are we doing? And why would there be any motivation to do the work that you guys are talking about? Because it's inherently risky and it's going to cost too much, right? But I think the position has to be, again, where does this path of Jesus lead? It leads to death, and then on the other side of that is resurrection, right? But there's got to be a death first sometimes. And so we're asking, at least on the leadership team, what sort of things need to die? And that's going to be a painful process. Death is always a painful process, but the trust is that on the other side will be something that looks closer to justice than it does today, I think. And so there's a deep trust that has to be there. And then I think the work of Julia, myself, Cleve, as like the pastoral team, becomes, again, helping people reinterpret and retranslate what that word success even looks like, you know, to get out of this empire building piece and to get back to what you guys were talking about, which was human capital and people thriving, right? I think that's where we've got to move towards. And that may have, Central's name may not be any of that stuff, right? And that's good. That's okay. It may mean supporting one of the organizations that's been struggling for 30 years to raise their funding, and we're just going to make sure they get their money to do their stuff. and nobody knows that we had anything to do with that. I think that's the kind of work that we have to be about. But there is a cost, and it's real. But I think there's also a cost to not doing this work, right? And what happens to our souls and our spiritual life if we don't do this and we continue to participate in systems that are harming people? So I'm getting on my own soapbox now. Julia, what do you think about all this? And like, as pastor and the church, and Secunda's question there.
I think you said it well. I need more. I'm also an introvert. I need more time to think about that one.
Yeah, no, it's okay. That's okay. Is that in your head, Secunda? Is that kind of what you were thinking through, or?
Yeah, I like what you said about like just, in the activist world, there's a term that's thrown out often, and it's like, co-conspirators, right? So I think folks who decide to move in that way, that's how you move, right? And I mean, even for us, right, for like BLMHTX, like we're not building a name for ourselves. Like we're not trying to become, the next NAACP. We're our desire is to build, a place in a world, like the motto is like, imagine a world where Black Lives Matter, right? And what does that mean? It just means like a quality of life for people. That's a decent quality of life, a just life. What does it take to do that? Well, I see people are getting locked up for no reason, right? I see, children are not getting the best educations, right? I see that like income inequality is just like is huge, and just housing is an issue, right? So if people are suffering, and then these issues cause other issues, right? And it's I mean, now with COVID and the issue around healthcare, that's already, huge, and it's amazing. Because we live in Texas, right? You have Galveston, UTMB. You have Houston, which has the largest medical center in the world, period. Not the nation, in the world. Like, I mean, more top 100 hospitals than anywhere. But people don't have access to quality healthcare in the middle of a pandemic, right? Doesn't the church, and the church, again, are the people. Don't the church care about that? Like, does it, right? Like, so what are the ways? Like, all those things have to do with justice, right? So what are the ways that we can work and build, like, in this community, so that we can ease some of those things, right? So that we can build a foundation where there are more people that are saying, no matter what, I'm going to be about this justice work for my life. Like, this justice work is church work, yes, right? It's not separate. And that's what we look to do.
Yes. So I think especially for white folks, like, it's trying to figure out how do I fit justice in with my conception of church, right? And like, if they're two different things that we're trying to juggle, and this one seems against this, but they're not, right? And at least the Jesus that I read about in the scriptures, the Jesus who in Luke 4 quotes Isaiah and says, I've come to set people free, and I've come to heal the sick, and I've come to release the prisoners. I mean, right? I don't know how to read that except for this kind of justice work. And so rethinking, what does salvation mean if it doesn't mean anything for real people right now, right? And what does sort of the kingdom of God mean if it's, again, like Karl Marx, right, this opiate for the masses that just kind of carries people along until the sweet by and by someday? Like, people don't have time for that right now. And so the work needs to be now. And I think the church has to, again, reclaim sort of that earthy. We're about to celebrate Christmas, right? God coming to earth, this whole incarnational movement that says real people, real bodies matter. And if the things that I'm preaching about on Sunday morning aren't directly affecting people in that way, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing?
Exactly. Like, what's the point? Right? And it's like, I asked God, what are you doing? And he was like, what are you doing?
Exactly
You
right.
know?
Yes.
You know, like, what are you doing? And when people are crying out, like I think people take things for granted. You know, we use words like protest, and we use people are crying out in the streets. People are crying out in the streets when they killed Jesus, and the women gathered under, right? And his friends gathered under, and they moaned and they wailed, and there was nothing that they can do. Like, we are witnessing that. The church is witnessing that. There is opportunity to do something about it. And I think, like, it's not, some people, I think, and white people in particular, sometimes get caught up on what they did yesterday. And, what all that, like, I'm not going to say that's neither here nor there, right? But I think you can take, because the reason why I say that, because sometimes those things stifle folks from moving, right? And you have to go with what you know now. Like, even as a Christian, when you're saved and you say, hey, I'm born again, I'm moving in Christ, I'm doing God's work, you start today. Like, whatever from yesterday, if I was worried about who I was when I was listening to Paula White and being a super Christian, me, Secunda, you know what I'm saying? Like, I would be caught up. I couldn't do what I gotta do. You know how many times I listened to this woman? You know what I mean? My Lord. So, like, I can't worry about that. I gotta keep moving. But I'm joking, but I do see a lot of people who are, like, coming into realization of, like, what is going on. Their ears are being opening to the folks that are crying out on the street, and then they don't know what to do, like, next, or they're crippled, or they're, like, lost in guilt, or that kind of thing. And I just think, my encouragement is to, like, move past that and be open and be willing. And the reason why I think I mentioned earlier about, like, after I had this revelation, there was no big movement then, because there is something about roots being, like, planted. There is something about being serious and committed about a thing. It's very different to move when hype happens. You see another person that's been murdered on the street or whatever happened, and it moves, or some event that's been happening. I lived in Houston, 5th largest city of the United States. I've experienced it all. This ain't nothing new to no Black folks. All this stuff been happening. I've seen it. I was in school. I had, someone killed, one of my friends killed at the age of 15, 16 by a security officer. Like, this is nothing new for us. This isn't, so there's always going to be a new thing. And then you have people who jump on, and it's like, it's hype, unfortunately, and it doesn't last, right? So, like, the desire, and when you see, a lot of times you'll see, folks like myself and Carie, a lot of times we're telling people to, like, plant themselves, move slower, like, go at a pace, because there's longevity in that type of work. Right? You have to be grounded, and the grounding is not with the doing, it's with the being, right? That's first. Are you willing? Oftentimes, Carie, she likes to tell people, look in first. Like, where are you? Right? What have you done? Because, you can also move too fast and, give up, do some foolish stuff, which you're gonna do anyway, right? Because that's real, that's life. So yeah, like, take your time, you know, reflect on where you are with this. Be honest with yourself and with God and with people you trust, and be about your Father's business.
Kind of, you brought it back around so beautifully with, it's all faith and activism, right? It's the same work. I love that. I love that so much. I want to be really respectful of time. Y'all have been so gracious with giving us this. Just to kind of like last parting kind of thing, we get to interact with you guys more, which is really exciting. And so there's a sort of coalition being formed. You guys have been meeting with some of our leaders through some Project Curate sessions. Julia's been in there. My sister's been in there, Nikki, and
I love your sister. She is so awesome. I love Julia too. I love all y'all. Your sister has this like, where did she
Fire.
come from?
She's a 8-wing-8, I think. She's she's amazing. And she lives like 2 blocks down the street from me now, which has just been such a gift. So
that's awesome. She is.
Yeah. So I haven't been a part of those sessions, but is there anything you guys want to share to sort of the larger central community, maybe about what's to come, or for people looking to take next steps or first steps, or I'm just going to leave that open-ended. Julia, why don't you kick off, because you've been sitting in those meetings. Or Secunda, I'm sorry, you had it.
I don't mind. I've been talking so much, and I was like, girl, step back.
I think you're the only extrovert here, Secunda, so.
Okay.
We're counting on you.
Don't judge me, y'all. But no. Yeah, so this.
I breathe a sigh of relief, so, you go.
Okay. These meetings are, they are a great opportunity to, one, a lot of the like self-reflection and opportunity for folks to get together and talk about where they are, that slowing down that I just mentioned earlier, that reflection on, both personally where you've been at the church, where you've been within the church and where you are yourself, and then moving into, so what is it that we can do? Us together as a church, with the group that we have, with the talents, skills, and resources that we have, what can we do? So what we're doing now within that coalition is we're using a Curate space, right, to reflect, consult, and build. And then we're looking at what is happening in Galveston, what's important to the folks within the church, right? And what do folks have capacity to do, right? Capacity in which, like, where their heart is, like, we've mentioned earlier how oftentimes people who volunteer in the church, they volunteer everywhere, right? So not trying to create something that will be another burden or hardship, but how can we create something that will be sustainable, right? And how do we do it with the people who are willing? And that's all I think it takes. And that's all we're looking for. Who is willing? And if folks are willing, there's an opportunity to form this coalition, do justice work, right, with the people that we have, and be effective within the city. Now, how that'll look, that depends on us, right? That depends on who shows up. Again, it's about what we bring, and what the folks who come together bring. We know there's a million things that we could do. So, because, unfortunately the world is a mess. So there's a lot that we can do together. But I'm so excited to be in the space. And I was so encouraged. Sometimes it's draining. I'm gonna be honest. Like, sometimes it's draining, because some people you have to convince that these things are important. And when you're convincing people to do justice work, sometimes you find yourself convincing people of other folks' humanity, right? And I'm not in a place where I'm willing or able to do that, you know, anymore. But like I think just the openness that folks brought on, you know, in the space, you know, and the questions, like I'm just really encouraged about what's gonna happen. And plus, Mike, you know, I know you dope. So you brought dope people, you know. Julia's dope. So yeah, you know, your sister dope too. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. Yeah.
I can retire now, y'all. I'm done. Man, Secunda and Carie, this was such a gift tonight. Thank y'all for being here. And Julia, you always had so much too, so thank you. And to Central folks watching, stay tuned. Julia will be kind of your contact person for some of that stuff going forward. So reach out to her for some more information. Robbie McGowan is in that group too. I want to make sure we don't leave him out in case he's watching tonight. So Robbie is fantastic as well. So okay, y'all, this was awesome. So we'll be looking forward to hearing from y'all again soon. And thanks again for all your time tonight.
Yeah, thank y'all so much.
Good night, y'all. Bless.